On the biggest stage in the world, FanDuel is changing the game because sometimes your player gets subbed off and your bet goes with them. Not anymore. With FanDuel Super Sub, if your player's subbed out, your bet stays in. That's right. If your player leaves a match, your bet continues on with the substitute. So you're still in it until the final whistle. Visit FanDuel.com. Get started now. Let there be goals this summer on FanDuel.
21 plus select states for Kansas in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino. 18 plus DCKYWY. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 1-800-MY-RESET. 888-789-7777. Visit ccpg.org/chat. Connecticut. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org. Maryland. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org. Call 800-327-5050. Massachusetts. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY. Text HOPE-NY in New York. Call 877-770-7867. Louisiana.
Visit FanDuel.com. Get started now. Let there be goals this summer on FanDuel.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
This is Let the Record Show. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg,
Essayist and commentator Eric Levine,
and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the New York State Republican Party, as well as the County Chair of the Republican Party out on Suffolk, Long Island. With us is our good friend, co-host, noted attorney, commentator, essayist, Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg, and we welcome back to Let the Record Show another good friend, Joel Rayburn, who's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, a diplomat, a scholar, an expert on Middle Eastern affairs. Joel, welcome back to the show. We're happy to have you.
Glad to be here.
So, as Eric and I walked into the studio, there was some breaking news that Trump has announced that he stopped the attacks on Iran, and he expects a signing of an agreement very shortly. That's the breaking news. So I want to open this up by saying I want to reiterate my concerns and my skepticism about a deal with Iran. It's very simple. These people are hegemonic, they're zealots, they're a death cult. They're dedicated to the destruction of the state of Israel, Western civilization, and, of course, the United States of America. My view has always been, as long as this regime stays in place, any deal, by definition, is a bad deal because they'll just regroup and come back at us. And they've been funding these terrorist groups, whether it's the Houthis, whether it's Hamas, or it's Hezbollah, or other fringe Islamist groups have waged war against Israel and their neighbors, fellow Muslim neighbors in the Middle East. This is very serious business. So if there is going to be a deal, we have to look at it very, very closely. At the very minimum, we have to make sure that any of the nuclear weapons and their nuclear so-called dust is removed, that the capacity to build drones, ballistic missiles is stopped, that they don't wage war through these proxies, and we don't fund these proxies, that we have some degree of stability in the Middle East. And let's not forget, if we cut a deal with these people, you have to trust but verify. And if you can verify, which I'm very skeptical about, you have a real problem. You cannot trust these people. They will be back at us. And they suppress their own people. And frankly, when Trump said back in April, help and hope is on its way, keep up the fight, I think he's selling out the Iranian people as well as his neighbors in the Middle East. I'm very unhappy about this news. The one piece of good news I'm happy about is there's a report that Jay Clayton, the former chairman of the Security and Exchange Commission, the United States Attorney for Southern District of New York, a great lawyer, good friend. Jay has been nominated to be the head of national intelligence, which I think is an excellent choice because Jay is really one of the most first-rate public servants you can have. At this point, I'll turn you over to Eric.
So, Joel, thank you. Welcome to the show. I share much of Richard's concerns. First, let's start with what you've heard about what, if anything, is contained in this deal, and then we can talk about some of the specific concerns or issues that arise from it.
Sure, Eric. Well, I think still probably a long way to go to get to the kind of deal that would be acceptable to the president and to U.S. interests, let alone allied interests like Israel's interests and so on. So I think I always endorse the president's optimism. I do think there's a lot of hurdles to be gotten over. But the fact we learned a couple of things over the last 24 hours that I think were really important to getting to the point. Whether let's say the object is to neutralize the Iranian regime's ability to do harm to the region around it, to our interest, to international security, and whether that can be secured in a deal or whether it has to be done just by military capitulation and so on. I think that's just instrumentality. That's not the end goal. So we learned a couple of things, I think, over the last 24 hours about what tools the president is willing to use to try to get to that end goal of eliminating the Iranians or neutralizing them as a threat. The first one is he showed very importantly going to return to force, and on a broad scale. Of course, Central Command had been using force, but it was just proportionate responses to attacks on us, self-defense type of attacks from the Iranians themselves. Last night was the first time that the U.S. that he instructed the U.S. military to go beyond that. And I think that dispelled a mistaken assumption that the Iranian regime had, that he wasn't willing to return to the use of force. So he's reestablished some of the credibility as a threat of force. Beyond that, a very important thing that we learned was that Project Freedom, the idea of opening up a separate channel through the Strait of Hormuz in order to get some vessels in and out, actually didn't shut down. It did continue in a clandestine way, and that there's actually been some volume of crude oil and some LNG, for example, that's been able to exit the Gulf. So that relieves the international economic pressure that the Iranians are able to wield. Those are two important factors. I think what we haven't accounted for is that I think there's a hidden priority for the Iranians that is mismatched by the U.S. strategy here, the U.S. negotiating strategy here. Our priority is first and foremost the nuclear program, the nuclear material, and so on. Second, Strait of Hormuz, and then the proxies. Hezbollah, in particular, is almost like it's being treated in our conception as a side issue to be put off to the side, or that could be conceded or restrained in favor of going for these other two priorities, the nuclear program and the Strait. I think the Iranians see it exactly the opposite way. I think for the IRGC, Hezbollah is their priority. They're willing to risk going back to war. They're willing to risk economic collapse in the service of Hezbollah much more than in the nuclear materials. That's why I think actually our approach so far has risked conceding to them up front the thing that they want most, which is to preserve Hezbollah as a threat and as a model of the Islamic Revolution and so on. Anyway, that's the main reason why I think there are potentially rough times ahead for this deal making.
Yeah, so let's focus for a second on. I happen to think you're right that the IRGC and the regime are laser focused on saving Hezbollah. It is a concession the Israelis absolutely cannot make. It is an existential threat to their existence. To allow Hezbollah to continue to exist is to concede the northern border of Israel. It will become a no man's land. No state can survive in that state. So, if this deal does include a forced cessation of hostility, an imposed cessation of hostility of the United States on Israel to prevent it from destroying Hezbollah, one of my huge concerns is that's going to put the Israelis and us on a collision course, because I don't know how Israel can survive with if Hezbollah is allowed to continue to exist. That's the first thing. And the second thing is it relates to the Arabs. If I'm a Gulf Arab state, I can say this is a wonderful deal. It's great. It's fantastic. It will not last a single day, assuming the Iranians live up to their obligations, which I think we can all be confident they won't. But even assuming they do, if I'm MBS, if I'm Mohammed bin Salman, I say to myself, well, Trump will be here for 2.5 years, and then he's gone, and the regime will still be here. So we have to start making accommodations to the regime now.
So much for the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, exactly. So it's at a time when we really need them to be aligning with us, to be stalwarts against the Iranian regime, and hoping to get them to join the Abraham Accords. Are my two concerns misplaced?
I don't think they're misplaced. I think there's a little more nuance to the issue of the Gulf states, the Arab states reaction, because I also think one thing that's quietly happened here is that they've come to believe, because the Iranian regime lashed out at them when the Arab states, were trying very hard to stay on the sidelines of this conflict. I think they've concluded in the Arab capitals that they can't live with the Iranian regime in the longer term. So they may have to hedge, they may have to accommodate in the immediate term to navigate the danger that the Iranians pose, but they are looking for ways, I think, to make themselves harder targets, like the Israelis have, like the Emiratis have started to do, and to align in a way that is against that it opposes Iranian power. So I think that's what's happened. The Iranians are going to wind up regretting in the longer term if that regime survives. On Hezbollah, I think you are right. This is the rock on which the ship will founder if it's not done the right way, because the Iranians want that agreement to include a U.S. obligation to restrain Israel from pressuring Hezbollah in Lebanon, and that's not something that Israel is going to be able to live with, and it's not something that I think any U.S. administration is able to or has the interest in guaranteeing. So that is the single great, as I said before, I think that's the single greatest sticking point on trying to get to some sort of arrangement. I think the president can get to a deal to compel or cajole the Iranians to relieve their pressure, their military threat to the Strait of Hormuz. On the further elements of it, on the nuclear program, on Hezbollah, I think it's tough sledding. A long way to go.
Yeah, so coming back to Hezbollah for a second, it's important for listeners to understand this isn't a Bibi issue. Everybody loves to say this.
It's all Netanyahu's fault.
We don't hate Jews. We don't hate really. We do hate Zionists, but it's unseemly to say it. And we don't hate Israel. We just hate Bibi. It's important for everyone to understand there's not a single elected official in Israel across the political spectrum, whether you're liberal or you're most conservative, that will allow Hezbollah to continue to exist. To the extent that there's criticism of the way that within Israel of how Netanyahu's been prosecuting the war, it's generally because you're not doing it effectively enough. So regardless of who the prime minister is, there are going to be elections in Israel in October or September. Regardless of who wins that prime minister is going to want to destroy Hezbollah. And I just don't see how any Israeli government can survive more than a few minutes if they concede that Hezbollah can stay there. The Israelis made a terrible mistake by allowing them to take over the country in the first instance. They're not going to repeat that mistake. Remember, the Iranian strategy is this ring of fire. Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syrian Hezbollah also in Syria, which they tried to set up, and then in Iraq, and then you have the elements in Judea and Samaria, and Israel can't allow that to continue. So that's the first point. So I just don't see how that could possibly work. And then to your point, the Arabs have learned a lesson. Maybe the UAE has, but many of the other Arab countries, whether it's Kuwait or Qatar or Saudi Arabia, they have shown themselves to be pathetically weak. So I really, if we're putting our eggs in the basket that those Gulf states are going to stand up and defend themselves, call me skeptical. I mean, I don't know what your reaction is to that.
Well, on that point, look, I think actually the Gulf states have been doing quite a lot. That's very quiet. I mean, the first thing is they've been facilitating U.S. and Israeli operations. I mean, U.S. in particular operations. The second thing is that they have from time to time been participating in those operations themselves, either from a support aspect or occasionally direct strike.
Beyond the UAE, I know the UAE has, but there's been other. Okay,
no. Yeah, beyond the UAE, and in addition to that, there is a brewing potential confrontation between the northern Gulf states, so Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain in particular, and the Iraqi militant groups that are under the Revolutionary Guard's direction. There have been so many drone and missile strikes against Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, potentially even Qatar, from Iraq, that it's gotten to the point where Saudi Arabia and others have quietly warned the U.S. and Iraqis that if it doesn't stop, that there will be strikes from some of the GCC countries against targets in Iraq. They're not going to tolerate it, and so that is a live issue. So I do think they've gotten. Again, if we go back to February, March, they had hoped to sit on the sidelines, and I think they've had a rude awakening, a wake-up call that they can't. No matter and there's no amount of going to Beijing and trying to enlist China as a guarantor that's going to prevent the threat from Iran against them, and an existential threat to boot.
So my last question would be, all right, so we've stopped now, and we hope to sign this deal. There's no the idea that the Iranians will sign any deal is, of course, is always a dubious proposition, but how many times can the U.S. military go through these fits and stops and remain at the ready at such high alert and still be effective? At some point, I have to think that, in addition to the cost, financial cost, that it's going to undermine our readiness.
It also undermines our credibility by jumping back and forth and back and forth. And credibility is very important in the Middle East. It all has to do with the perception of who's the strong horse. Joel?
Respectfully, Your Honor, I don't think that that's the case about credibility.
Jesse.
I think the fact that what Joel had said about us going kinetic will immediately, I think, answer a lot of those questions. But I'll let him speak for himself. And I just wanted to jump in there when you said that about credibility.
Well, we're going to jump to a break because Elias has given me the signal. We're going to have Joel Rayburn.
We're going to give
Hudson.
Joel an opportunity to think about this.
That's right. We give him a few minutes. So Joel will be thinking. That's what he does at the Hudson Institute. He sits there and he thinks. Joel's a noted scholar, noted thinker, scholar, diplomat, and we're going to be back in a few moments with more important, interesting conversation. We're going to be leading off with Jesse Garcia with Mr. Rayburn. Please stay with us. We'll be right back with more interesting, important conversation.
Let the Record Show is on the air. This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg,
Essayist and commentator Eric Levine,
and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show. Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, noted attorney, commentator, essayist Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With us, staying with us for our second segment of today's show is Joel Rayburn of Hudson Institute, a noted scholar, diplomat, great thinker, an expert on the Middle East. So, Joel, if you will try to answer Eric's question, then we'll pick up with Jesse.
Yeah, I think so. The question was, how long can the U.S. military keep it up? Is it harming U.S. readiness, and so on? Well, I think, look, the U.S. military has to keep it up because if the president is going to get to a resolution of this conflict on terms that are acceptable to us, he has to have that credible threat of the use of force.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So he can't hold the pressure off and expect to get his strategic objectives. That is where the Iranian regime, until last night, I think thought they were headed. They thought he was unwilling to go back to the use of force because of domestic political constraints or economic constraints here in the U.S. The Iranians can read Twitter. They can read the U.S. media here, and that's what they were hoping for. I think they had gotten into a situation where they believed time was on their side and that President Trump was going to be unwilling to come back and hit them before the midterms and so on. And he dispelled that, or he started to dispel it anyway last night. He has to keep the blockade in place. He has to keep the means in place, not just to force them to a deal that's acceptable to him, but then to enforce the implementation of it instead of what they normally do. So the U.S. military doesn't really have a choice but to stay on station for the time being.
Jesse.
Joel, thank you. It's great to have you again. And before we get into continuing on this question, I just want to go back to something we were talking about off air, about this alliance that you put together on the blue and orange with the Oklahoma Thunder, your favorite team, and the New York Knicks.
Yes.
Last night when we were taping the show, OG Onanabe made that incredible tip-in that gave the Knicks a 3-1 victory. And hopefully when this airs, we will be celebrating and planning a parade for new world champion New York Knicks down the Canyon of Heroes.
Absolutely.
So thank you for how you negotiated that alliance between the Thunder and the Knicks. It's probably the subject of another show, and we'll have you back after the NBA Finals. But just going back to what we were bringing up to you, what it seems to be, and I want to just speak to a couple of issues you brought up with Eric, is that some of the issues that have been clarified here in the last several days, when this airs, it'll be a couple of days, is that President Trump has definitely set forth that the use of full force is never off the table, and that that the Project Freedom was still in force, so maybe a little bit more clandestine, maybe less public than we were led to believe. But it also goes to the fact that whatever deal comes forward, and especially as it involves Israel's northern border, that whatever may be being said publicly between the two leaders, do you see that, or do you, from your experience and what your sources, that Israel, no deal is not going to move forward without Israel's understanding, acceptance in this deal, and especially with the fact that what we concluded in your last question, with the last Eric's last question, is that the use of American force and the presence of American force is it is the only insurance that whatever deal may be signed, and no deal could be signed by the time we get to this, because that's the way the Iranians operate, and we don't even know which group we're talking to or whatnot. But do we see that there's a lot more going on underneath, diplomatically, militarily, strategically, special forces to keep like the Strait of Hormuz open, Project Freedom going, and the fact that we are there as a forceful military to ensure whatever deal may or may not come?
Well, I'll add one thing. I'll add two things to your list, Jesse. The first is the president in his statement earlier today indicated that he's willing to seize Karg Island, or he's willing to seize the Iranian oil production. That's the first time he's been that explicit about that threat. So this is another threat that he's putting on the table. In addition to that, we also heard from Secretary Scott Bessent this morning reiterating that which kind of gets lost from the headlines. Operation Economic Fury is continuing, and that the Iranians, the longer the Iranians keep up their confrontation with the United States, the more they're going to lose. They're going to deteriorate economically, and that's not a matter just of there's no concept behind that economic sanctions are going to make life difficult for the Iranian people, and then that's going to lead to some chain reaction. That's not the idea. The idea is severely disrupt the Iranian regime, especially the IRGC's cash flow that they require to prosecute the war and to pay for their security apparatus that keeps them in power. That's so I think when you add those two things to sort of the toolbox, toolkit that you outlined, I think that tells you, yes, there's an awful lot going on. It's not just about the blockade. It's not just about the negotiation that's happening. There are these other lines of effort, these other lines of pressure that are very important to operate all together as a grand strategy.
But I do want to come back to one of the topics we were discussing a little bit earlier, that the Iranian mindset of when Trump leaves, assuming they make it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do they just say to themselves that we don't have to outlive the United States? This is for the regime. We just have to outlive Trump. Because if there's a Democratic president, Kamala Harris will never enforce anything. Pete Buttigieg will never enforce anything. AOC will never enforce anything. So is potential Iranian strategy. Remember, John Kerry, during the first Trump administration, would literally publicly tell the Iranians, just wait out Trump. Help is on the way. Is that has to be in the back of their minds?
Well, I think you're right, and we lived through that movie one time before because in late 2020, we had the Iranian regime under severe economic pressure, very tight sanctions pressure that brought them really to the brink of collapse, to brink of bankruptcy and financial collapse, after which their regime would have collapsed. And they were just holding on for dear life, hoping that there would be a change of administration, and there was. And they gambled that there would be an immediate policy change with the new Biden administration, and they gambled right. And the sanctions pressure was relieved, and they were able to then they built out the axis of resistance even more with the sanctions relief windfall that led, in my view, directly to October 7th and October 8th. So yes, they will be looking to try to wait out President Trump. This is why I think the role of whoever's going to be the nominees for 2028 is very important. That they tackle this issue and be explicit about it in the campaign and be held to that. And in addition, that Congress has a role here. That Congress, if there's a consensus in Congress or a majority in Congress that's behind this kind of tough peace through strength policy vis-a-vis the Iranian regime, then that's what can make it sustainable, regardless of who's in the White House, or as sustainable as possible.
Yeah, but I don't see the
Democrats. I have no faith in Congress.
Yeah, well, I have less faith. I have less faith in the Democrats. I have less faith in the Democrats. Part of their policies now is to separate themselves from Israel.
Exactly.
So and they think the JCPOA still is the greatest thing since the British surrendered at the end of the revolution. So I don't see how that works. I don't see how that works.
Well, that's why, gents. In my view, every congressional candidate who's going to be running in the 2026 and 2028 cycles should be put on the record. What is your policy? If you're going into Congress, do you support this pressure policy? Do you support the strategic objectives that are laid out by Epic Fury, Economic Fury, and this overall strategy, or not? And make them go on the record so that voters know what they're getting when it comes time to vote.
The war is currently very unpopular.
Oh, for sure. Part of the problem, gentlemen, is this: the Straits of Hormuz were open. These guys led to the crisis in terms of maritime trade. They've learned a great lesson, which is they have real leverage because of physical geography and their ability to stymie maritime trade and have international economic results favorable to them. They've learned that lesson. They will not forget that lesson. They're a regime that's dedicated to the destruction of Western civilization. That's in their toolbox, and that's a real problem. That's my first point. My second point is I have no confidence at all in the ability of the American people to take long-term pain. It's not in their toolbox. It's not in their mindset. It's not what the American people
No, but we've
about.
shown during World War II we can do that. But
that was a different world.
But the public has to be prepared.
No,
the public has to be prepared.
Listen, Trump could do a much better job of messaging and narrative and explanation. There's no doubt about that. I agree with that. But I'm saying to you, this is a country that has an extreme left in the Democratic Party, which is isolationist, an extreme right in the Republican Party that's isolationist. You have people who are bitching and moaning and crying about the price of oil, not understanding that when people tell you they want to kill you, you should take them seriously. And whether oil costs a little bit more, doesn't cost a little bit more, the ability of these people to bring destruction to these shores, to our major cities, to our people, is enormous, and they have to fight back. And I don't have confidence in these these people at all to really sustain pain. I have absolute confidence in the ability of the Iranian regime to sustain pain, particularly when there's other people doing the dying for them, like Hamas and the Houthis and Hezbollah. Joel, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're in an uncomfortable situation where we have some real threats out there. We have an alliance of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and a few others, and I don't think the American people fully appreciate the danger of this alliance to our way of life, and people are fatigued with the global war on terror and with what they term forever wars, and they're in that kind of moment that we can naturally get into because we're protected by two oceans, where there's an inclination to disengage from the world and look at our own affairs. And what I think, for me, the lesson of the 20th century was that we have to care about what's happening on the other end of those oceans, and on who's in charge at the other end of those oceans and what their intentions are. And so if we forget that lesson right now, then we can expect to be in a very dangerous time.
Well, we don't teach that lesson anymore. So our young people,
young
people don't even know this.
Don't.
Young people don't even know the 20th century occurred.
Jesse, final
Some
thoughts
people
on
don't
this
even
segment.
My final thoughts. Let's just go what you were speaking about. Do you think that when we were speaking that we need to address this through Congress and through the president? One of the problems we have, though, is that I know we all remember how we came together as a country. And when 9/11 happened, just about 25 years ago, almost 25 years ago, we don't see that same type of unity on issues like this because politics has become, especially on the left, so polarizing and one of, if not this, then that. Do you ever see a situation, whether it's this Iran deal or any type of conflicts or foreign challenges that we'll be facing in the future that does bring this country together, if not, ending a forever war? This is a war that's been going on for 47 years with Iran against the United States.
We didn't start the forever war.
Yeah,
the Iranians started it.
Well, I think the difference is that on 9/11, the homeland was directly attacked. Here on October 7th, the Iranians and the radical left have very effectively said, this isn't our war, this is Israel's war. This is the Jews' war. And that's why you see, I think, a lack of support for it. Yeah. And it has to be pushed back.
Yeah, the problem, of course,
the Jews are dying. Yeah. Israelis are dying for us in our war, for Western civilization. But I think that's why. I don't know, Joel, if you have a different view.
And people have absolutely forgotten the incursion into our hemisphere of Iranian-supported countries like Venezuela, like Cuba, and other communist states. They have infiltrated not only the United States of America here, but in our hemisphere as well. And they will regroup and try to do that again. So it's not like you have two big oceans, and I have doubt with the technology today that two big oceans are going to be worth a damn over the years as they enhance the ability of ballistic missiles to hit.
Let's give Joel the last word.
Yeah, I think there's still a majority in Congress that would line up behind the idea that there needs to be a strong policy against the Iranian regime to curtail its ambitions, to neutralize it as a threat. They may or may not agree with the specific mode of that, whether that's an epic fury type of military force operation or it's economic pressure or it's diplomatic pressure. But I do think you still can get Congress to line up behind the strategic objective that the Iranian regime's a threat, can't be tolerated, they can't have a nuclear weapon, and that needs to be U.S. policy. And I think working with that kind of majority and locking it in is the only way to make President Trump's policy durable beyond his presidency.
But I think the Biden administration belies your statement, unfortunately.
Well, Joel, it's been a wonderful conversation with you. Troubling, but wonderful. I want to thank you on behalf of Chairman Garcia, Eric, and myself for being back with us again. As this unfolds, we'll reach out to you again to join us. Thank you for your analysis and your insight. And we'll be back in a few moments with our final segment of this week's Let the Record Show. Please stay with us for more important and interesting conversation. And once again, Joel Rayburn of the Hudson Institute, thank you for being our guest.
Yeah, you were great. Thank you so much, Joel.
Thanks, Joe.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
This is Let the Record Show.